Hi, everybody, and welcome today. We're going to get back on a series we've been doing because I renewed my interest. And so we're going to be looking at what functional maturity means in relationships through the lens of different personality development models. So hopefully, if there's a nerd side of you that likes to study psychology and things like that, hopefully you can get a little brain tickle that way. But as always, I'm looking to give really practical application things that you can work on from day one in your recovery that can help your relationship. So we're going to look at humanistic psychology and humanism. To give a little history lesson, this was a big departure from where the field of psychology had been up to that point. So I think Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, those are kind of the parents of humanistic psychology. They were theorizing and writing, I think, back in the 60s, maybe 70s. Um, and their big break from the previous theories before was their look at human beings was not to find pathology. So they did not start with a pathological understanding of, okay, what went wrong and what explains this. They started with the assumption that all human beings are basically good and everybody wants to grow. And to use Maslow's term, everybody wants to self-actualize. So um, there's some really interesting insights into what maturity means in relationships. And this is something I've seen with colleagues who are really humanistically oriented and practice that way with their clients. There's certain ways that you hold space and you hold accountability from the humanistic perspective that I think have some really good implications for early sex addiction recovery. So, like I said, you've probably heard of Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, that hierarchy of needs pyramid. Um, that's Abraham Maslow. Carl Rogers, he pops up every now and then in the marriage therapy literature, especially around active listening and how to um, gain understanding of another person, not just knowledge of what they're saying. So a big part instead of an overall developmental model, humanistic psychology is more of like, here's some principles and here's some parameters that human behavior is understood through. So I'm going to highlight a few of those. And with all of these that we've done, like we could spend so much time going down every little rabbit hole, but I'll just highlight on a high level. So humanistic psychology highlights the existence and the importance of personal agency over factors that we would call deterministic factors. So a determinist factor would be like biology, genetics, even your subconscious, your unconscious, things that drive you without your knowledge. So humanistic psychology says everyone has personal agency, and it's the series of choices we make that largely determine who we are. Now, this doesn't square with a lot of what we are learning about neurology and even like in quantum physics, the idea that there is independent thought and behavior is really being challenged. And I won't go down that rabbit hole. But I do think it's a really good assumption to make. And I've said this to folks I've worked with almost from the beginning of my career, um, that you're going to use choice to get out of this. You're going to use choice to change this. But just because you made choice to get out of this does not mean you use choice to get into this. And that's something that I have said to the addicts that I work with, because there can be an immense amount of shame when you start making choices to change and you uh, maybe start to connect some dots that may not belong together. Well, what are the choices that led me to this? And I think from the humanistic perspective, trying to unwind choices about the past is not as helpful as looking forward to the choices you're going to make in the future. So accepting that you have agency, um, even token agency. So sometimes you're choosing between the lesser of two evils, or you're choosing the equal of two evils. But the fact that you're exercising choice is sometimes critical to adaptive functioning. Sometimes that's all you have is I can choose which of these crappy options uh, um, I'm going to accept right now or I'm going to pursue right now. Rogers would also acknowledge that human beings cannot be 100% agency driven because he would highlight that if you received conditional love as a child, that may affect your self-esteem. And that is not a choice that you made. That's a choice somebody else made that you have no control over. So again, like I said there, I don't know that the tenet of personal agency holds a lot of water when you look at the whole span of human experience. But if you're looking at someone um, at the start line of a change process, I do think acceptance of personal agency, even a increased focus on what are the choices that I can make or have made that affect how I'm doing or what I'm doing here is really, really important. The next thing that humanism highlights is the importance of subjective experience. And if you've seen these webinars before, you know what I'm talking about, couples and relationships. I've said before that there is no reality between two people. The best we have is perception. So we're always dealing with perception. That's what this means, is that subjective reality, what I think and what I feel is as real as it gets for me. So from a humanist perspective, um, instead of challenging subjective reality, we work to understand, how did I come to believe that? What are the dominoes that fell, or what are the choices that I made, or the combination of the two that led me to see the world as I do. Um, so the experiences and the conclusions that each of us draw in our own lives are valid for us, and maybe all that matters for us. So practical application in early recovery, I think this has huge significance in early recovery. First, if you've betrayed and you can't accept the subjective reality of the person you betrayed, you are still playing God, exercising control and distorting reality. Well, it's not that bad. Or I wouldn't, I would have been over this faster. Or it's not a big deal. Or you don't have to worry. I am trustworthy. I just made mistakes. So when you start messing with another person's subjective reality, or you start distorting another person's reality or attempting to, that's where we bring in terms like crazy making, gaslighting, manipulation. So all attempts to single-handedly change someone's subjective reality just should be abandoned early in recovery. This is also where I think that early recovery wisdom, like stay on your side of the street or focus on your side of the street, this is where I think that really, really matters. If what you are trying to do, either as someone who's done the betraying or someone who's been betrayed, if what you're trying to do is to make a case for your partner to fundamentally change how they understand and see the world, and even you, in one argument or on one principle, you're barking up the wrong tree. That's just not how human beings work in reality. So when we stay focused on how our own subjective reality impacts how we see things, as we get focused on being able to detect maybe our biases in our own subjective reality, I tend to think that people are against me. I tend to think that people are mean. I tend to think that I'm in trouble. On and on down the list, as we get more adept at dealing with our own distortions, we tend to do better in relationships. And when we recognize that we all have distortions and there's limitations when we're coming at the world in a distorted way, we can make more relational space. So Rogers was he was famous for encouraging, and this is what I've heard in almost every couples therapy training that I've gotten, encouraging the ability to repeat someone's position back to them in terms that they themselves can accept. He says that's one of the markers of real understanding, that you can use your own words, you can use your own phraseology, and you can encapsulate a different person's point of view than your own in your own words in a way that they listen to and say, yep, you are understanding me. That's right. So that's a practical tool. That's something to focus on as you're looking to make room for a different subjective reality early on. Listen, find your own language for it. Especially if you've done the betraying. Um, get to the point where you can tell your partner's story in your own words in terms that your partner can accept and recognize. Um, that is a sign that you have ironed out so much defensiveness, and so much distortion, not because your partner is the arbiter of all truth, but because your partner is their own person. And the fight here is against your addiction and your lack of integrity, not against any other individual. Um, there's room for others when you recognize that relationships are a combination of different subjective realities. Um, let's see. I often look at with my individual clients, I have them look at the spouse in their head because that's actually who we relate to, not the spouse in reality. The spouse in their head. Uh, this is because this is more a place where something can be done because this has to do with you and your perceptions. And like I said, that is the that's more the picture that we carry of our partners and our spouses than who they actually are. So dealing with your own or dealing with your own subjective perception and being very aware that that is what we all do, accepting there is no universal truth that everybody will experience in the same way. We all have our subjective realities, and things get filtered. Another thing that we talk about in humanistic psychology is self-actualization. So this is that people are basically good and they're looking for congruence between their perceived and their actual selves. And we're all motivated by some kind of growth. Now, if you uh, are in the rooms of recovery, if you are starting to come to terms with your own addiction, if you are someone who has been betrayed by addiction, you may have dry heaved by what I hearing what I just said. Here's actually where I think this has some good traction early in recovery. If this is true, you have to check how you are doing in reality versus what you perceive about yourself. So the inventories and congruency checks from the 12 steps. When you sit with your therapist and your therapist keeps pointing out contradictions between what you're saying and what you're doing, welcome that like an antibiotic for an infection. It's really, really powerful and painful, but it's really, really powerful to dive in to how split we are and to acknowledge the gulf between what we want to be and what we are. Those are the moments that I think make up, they talk in the 12 steps, the importance of rock bottom. Those are the moments that make up rock bottom when we can see clearly that what I think about myself and what I'm doing are different. And again, that outlines the work on your side of the street. I think addiction is a distorted attempt to self-actualize. I think it's a distorted attempt to find growth and safety. Um, so if that's a driver in us and we get introduced to a tool that is not effective at making the change, the desire may be there. And when you have the right tools in your hand and when you have healthy perspective in your hand, um, you may already possess all the motivation and momentum you need. Patrick Carnes talks a lot about how there's just a degree or two of difference between a person in full-blown addiction and a really creative, successful person. And this is one of those, like in addiction, we are so creative and so tenacious. Um, and I would say even in early betrayal trauma recovery, a lot of the reactivity that we may see, or the behavior that has a lot of addicts getting critical of their partners, it's tenacity, it's ferocity. It's this like I still need to grow, I need to be safe, and I just realize the environment I have isn't conducive to that. So that energy can really be harnessed and it can be built for our good if we will unwind our distortions and check the incongruencies that we all have. Um, So again, in this self-actualization piece, I'm going to borrow a phrase from Mr. Burns on The Simpsons. A lot of our own suffering comes from wallowing in our own crapulence. And for me, that crapulence is most often, again, that difference between what I want to be, who I feel I am at my core, and what I'm doing. Without the perspective or the willingness to see their difference, there's no chance at remediation. You can't regulate a feeling that you can't feel. You can't drop something that you can't acknowledge that you're carrying. And you can't work on something that you can't see as a problem. The last piece I'll hit here is individualization. So humanistic psychology will say that group norms and patterns are not valid or as valid as individual differences and uniqueness. So in humanistic psychology, we have qualitative research, which is individual case studies, which are not held up to represent the whole, but more held up to look at this individual combination of traits, resiliencies, and problems. Um, so where I think this applies in early recovery, for addicts in recovery, we talk about terminal uniqueness. I actually think we need to be able to do both to get an accurate idea of ourselves. It's good to know what the general norms and patterns are for people in your stage of life, your age, your cultural, your religious background. It's good to know generally what might be expected or how things might work, because that can give you some perspective in how you're doing in your life. Um, so I remember I was in college at the tail end of the last major recession that we had. And I was really discouraged about how much money went out the door every month. And when I would hear savings rates for people my age, when I would hear uh, uh, income comparisons, people who were able to utilize their degree, I could actually look at the general population and I could see, oh, I'm actually doing a bit better than the average person my age. And it brought some anxiety down. For addicts in early recovery, you're really good at the uniqueness part of it. So I do think it's really important to dive into the generalist part of it. So you have to be able to index on both and to know why and how you're different from the general population specifically and after effort rather than a general theory or an untested membership within a group. So again, I hear this like joining support, getting therapy, talking with a sponsor. There's usually when I hear resistance to that, there's usually some general theory. Oh, well, there's too much God taught there. I actually know a lot of 12-step fellowships that would perfectly encapsulate the idea of a higher power, and it has nothing to do with any traditional notion of God. And they're extremely effective at helping people with that. So in other words, you have to put rubber on the road, you have to put boots on the ground, you actually have to explore yourself earnestly and explore community earnestly to discover how you are similar and how you are different. And again, that's unique. It's good to look under the rock. It's good to look under the rocks on all addicts generally. I think those are really good places to start. All addicts lie, all addicts distort, all addicts manipulate. Um, of course, if you're married to terminal uniqueness, you'll hear the all in that and say, well, then that can't be true, so it's not me. I think it's good again to turn over that rock personally. How do I lie? How do I distort? How do I manipulate? Where does that come from in me? For betrayed partners, there's a wealth of good information about addiction and patterns and what to expect, but it is general. So you'll get safe and grounded knowing what specifically you and your partner are facing. So I've seen on some occasions, I've seen partners, again, understandably so, they will turn to books, they will turn to articles, they will turn to blogs and podcasts to understand their partner um, more readily than they will turn to their partner to understand their partner. I've seen in some cases some couples avoid a disclosure process or only do parts of it, because again, it's scary to face an individual and to know there's not an owner's manual for this. So we may avoid the specificity. Um, but the specificity really is what relationships are made on or broken on. So for both parties, I think it's important to take deep breaths through the fear you have of discovering yourself, finding yourself, experiencing yourself against the backdrop of different groups and experiences, but it's invaluable. Again, there I agree with the humanist perspective. Group norms and patterns are not as valid as individual differences and uniqueness. So even at the bottom of something devastating like addiction and betrayal, there are human beings, and that would be my summary of this. There's a human being at the bottom of everything, and it's often a still small feeling child trying to strive for love and belonging like we all do. They're trying to do their best. Maturity is not making it hard for others to recognize your humanity. So my take on humanism is not maturity is holding all these tenets out for another person. It's looking at the ways that you create a field of distortion around yourself so that people don't really know you for the vulnerable, earnest, desirous person that you are. That's where we move into defensiveness. That's where we move into secrecy. That's where we move into, well, I will if you will. So I would say my summary, my takeaway from looking at humanistic psychology is when we are mature, we don't make it hard for others to see the striving, needing of love and acceptance and belonging human being that's at the core of all of us. And that is maturity from the humanistic perspective.
Thank you, Jon. Um, please type your questions into the Q&A. We've got several in there already, but I just kind of want to pull out my takeaways from this, and they may be different than other people's, but I mean, my first takeaway is my perception informs my reality. And my reality is a subjective reality. Your perception informs your reality, and your reality is a subjective reality. And we may not be on the same page with that. One of the things I need to know is I cannot or probably shouldn't try to change your reality. Um, Addicts, we love to do that. We call it gaslighting. It's a form of abuse. Please don't. Um, but I may need to change my perception, my subjective reality. This is a disease of perception. I've heard that over and over in AA. I perceived that if Jon was engaging in the same behaviors as me, Jon would have a serious problem. But it's okay for me because and I would fill in the blank with 1,000 different things. I thought I was, the day I walked into recovery, I thought I was honest, kind, caring, that I wasn't hurting anybody, that everybody liked me, that I was happy, that I was fulfilled. Um, it was this alternate self. It was a very skewed version of actual reality, but it was my perception at that time because denial is a powerful thing. I had worked very hard to create this perception of reality. Um, and you're right that a lot of recovery is a reality check. Step four is Step four was a whammy for me. It was like, oh my God, I'm the asshole. I thought it was all of you. I'm the person that's screwing up my life. Step four was like, whoa. Um, and with that, then I could start becoming self-actualized. I could start becoming the person I wanted to be. And I could stop trying to manipulate you into seeing me the way I wanted you to see me. That's sort of my takeaway from this. So am I on target?
Yeah, no, totally. And I appreciate that concise description there, Scott. Our own reality is full of holes. Like everybody's reality is Swiss cheese. And it's not that the self-actualized people have a bulletproof reality, because that's not a thing. I think the self-actualized people are the ones who can accept and acknowledge and explore those contradictions. And some contradictions lend themselves really, really well to, oh, well, something could change here. My behavior could change here, and then all of a sudden I have alignment between who I think I am and who I actually am. I have alignment between my belief and my behavior. And some contradictions uh, must be allowed to stay. So as I work with couples, one of the contradictions that I see is this is the person that simultaneously um, means the most to me, and I couldn't imagine anyone else I'd want to be close to, and nobody hurts me or bothers me like this person does. And that's not to say that we all need to be part of these like wild shift relationships, but I actually think in that contradiction, the potential for so much safety and so much hurt, that's what vulnerability is. That's what might make a relationship or a love special. Is that we both realize we both have our hand on the red self-destruct button, and we make choices not to do that. Um, so reality, I don't think we should capitalize the R in reality when we talk about subjective reality. We're just talking about this self-contained world I've made around myself. And if you're struggling with addiction, you're isolated in that self-contained world. It doesn't have a lot of connection points to the outside world. And so we can work on those connection points. We can look at those contradictions, and we can get a more robust subjective reality.
So even after years of recovery, my goal is not to be a solid hunk of cheese. It's to go from Swiss cheese with big holes to like baby Swiss with
Yeah, there you go.
tiny pockets here and there.
Or some strategic big holes.
Yeah,
Like
okay.
for me, in the realm of spirituality, in the realm of religion, I was raised where uncertainty and mystery meant that you were lazy. You weren't really looking at it. Now for me, the uncertainty and the mystery and the contradiction, like that's my spiritual home now. That actually brings me a lot of reassurance and a lot of meaning in my life. And and it's a place that I don't ignore it to keep it that way, but I make sure that as I study and pursue, I'm not forcing conclusions because those forced conclusions kill the whole deal for me.
Yeah. You don't want to force your perception or someone else's perception onto what may or may not be the truth, it sounds like.
Hmm.
Which I'm
Hmm.
kind of the same, particularly with spirituality. I'm like, you believe whatever, find what works for you and go for it. I'm not going to tell you what to believe,
Hmm. Hmm.
but yeah. Okay, let's jump into the Q&A. Type your questions into the Q&A. We've actually got, I think, just two. One of them is just kind of split up here in a couple, or maybe it's three. My husband stalked two married women from his yoga class and sent them Mother's Day gifts and is claiming that he was a bit attracted to them. Is this a lie or is he simply insane? Okay.
And I think they have a correction down there. Correction, he claims he was not attracted to them.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Um, my response to that is the troublesome part is not the attraction or the lack thereof. The troublesome part is the stalking. The stalking is a boundary violating behavior. There's no other way to slice that.
Yeah.
Even if you're claiming I was in some kind of dissociative fugue state and I didn't realize what I would do was doing, I might argue that that's even more dangerous than I did know what I was doing.
Right.
So I think the big story here is the stalking and the boundary violation. And if that's not being taken seriously or being looked at or having accountability taken directly around that, there is denial. There is protection of whatever that's about. And often when we see severe or intense boundary violating behavior, that is usually more of a desire for power over other people than anything else. And that's concerning. That's concerning. So my response to that would be Um, for you and your own boundaries, I think what you're looking for is he looking at the stalking behavior and taking that seriously, or is he making excuses? Well, I wasn't attracted. So it's not that yeah, this is troubling, but it's not that troubling because there was no attraction there. That's a red herring that misses the whole point.
Yeah. And sending Mother's Day gifts to someone who's not your own mother or daughter or sister or sibling, whatever, um, creepy. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
that's a stalking behavior. Like I'm
yeah,
inserting myself into your life, whether you want me there or not.
yep.
Um, and that's troublesome. Um, is this, John, a common thing with sex addicts, or is this a different thing than sex addiction?
The stalking,
Yeah.
yeah. So folks who stalk may be addicted to sex or pornography or whatever. Um, but folks who are addicted to sex and pornography are not stalkers. So it is a separate thing. This is more the legal term. It's not a psychological term or a treatment term, but the legal term, offending behavior, is different than addictive behavior. And that can be another part of the denial, is to say that this is part of my addiction. It's its own thing and it needs its own treatment. I think this came up in our last webinar as well. Candace Christiansen, who recently did a couple of seeking integrity Q&As and webinars. She does fantastic work at the intersection of stalking, offending type behavior and addiction. Barbara Levinson is another one that does good work around that. Get a specific offender-oriented program or offense-oriented program, or you'll miss things. We see a lot. I've seen a lot. Guys who want to be part of the general 12-step community and they can get benefit from that. But if they don't look at this boundary violating part, this serious boundary violating part, um, they will skate through and they'll manipulate that 12-step process. They can actually create a lot of damage in those groups because they have to be challenged to look specifically at that. And there's a special kind of denial around that too, um,
Yeah.
that often doesn't get confronted until there's an arrest.
Yeah. What you're describing says inpatient treatment.
Yeah,
Um, um, you know, and maybe for sex addiction and then for
yeah,
the offending behaviors or vice versa. It may
yeah,
be two separate inpatient treatments that are needed here.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so next one, and thank you for bringing this up because sex addiction is never an excuse for bad behavior.
Mm-mm.
There was that guy in Cleveland who had women chained in his basement for years on end. He's like, I'm a stone cold sex offender. I'm like, well, or sex addict. And we're like, no, you're please don't do that.
Yeah,
You're a sociopath, a
yeah.
psychopath. You're you know. All right. Can a sex addict really learn empathy and attunement after severe gaslighting and integrity abuse? If so, how long can it take if they are in recovery? Great question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. To answer the first part, I would say yes. Empathy and attunement are skills. They're not inborn things in us. And speaking from a maturity standpoint, maturity is continuing to sharpen and learn those skills, not just take it for granted that you can do them moderately well. So yes, it can be learned. And how long can it take if they are in recovery? So the if is really, really important there. Generally, what I've seen, it's about the 18-month mark if someone's in good recovery, where people they are in relationship with will start to say, huh, you're different. Something's really operating differently here, and I can feel it. That can often be frustrating for addicts who are in good, solid recovery, who are saying, I feel radically different, and it feels like my whole world has changed, and everybody thinks I'm the same old, same old. Um, so the marker of empathy and attunement is not whether you think you're doing it, it's whether the people you're trying to empathize and attune to feel empathized with and attuned to. And so generally it's about the 18-month mark where we'll see that kind of like internal shift really start to solidify. And especially where the daily focus may not be on I just have to stay sober, I just have to stay sober. And you may be on your second, third, fourth run through the 12 steps, really looking at different layers of awareness. Your focus in your recovery with your therapist may have turned from um, again, day-to-day functioning to building some meaning, some connection, intimacy, and relationships. But as with everything, to point to our humanistic thing here, 18 months is about when I would expect to see that, but I have seen differences in individuals, some shorter and some on a longer time frame.
I will simply say my own experience. I remember being in treatment 25 plus years ago now, and Bob Delbeck was my therapist. Bob Delbeck talked like this. And we were talking about empathy, and I was like, okay, intellectually, I get this empathy thing, but when am I going to feel it? And he looked at me and said, you, 5 years. He was joking a little bit, uh, but he was telling me it's not going to happen this week or next week. You're going to work on it for a while. And it really was about the 18-month mark. I remember I was sitting in a 12-step meeting and someone I knew and liked, who had been scraping by. I live in Southern California. Everybody's in the industry, had just sold a screenplay and was thrilled. And I was elated. And I was like, oh my God, I'm feeling this person's joy
Mhm.
with him. I mean, I'm not getting any money from this. I'm not getting any, thing from, I'm just happy because he's happy. Oh, that's empathy. I'm feeling someone else's feelings with them. But that was after doing some work. You mentioned, rather than trying to change other people's perception of reality, we need to understand their perception of reality. And that's the work of learning empathy is I'm
Mhm.
curious about your perception of reality. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Why are you thinking and feeling? Oh, those are the building blocks of actual just emotional empathy. We get intellectual empathy first.
Yeah,
I can understand what you're feeling. I can name it, but I'm not feeling it with you. One day we wake up and we're feeling it with you.
yeah.
Um, Look, if I can get around to empathy, anyone can. Trust me.
And I've seen that transformation. I didn't know you, Scott, early in recovery, but I've seen that transformation in a lot of people. So I can say with confidence, it absolutely can be learned.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a skill and you can learn it. It does take
Mhm.
practice and you will do it badly in the beginning, or at least I did. But okay, can a sex addict heal with just 12-step meetings and a CSAT, or are there other things they can do to learn how to create new habits around integrity? Another great question.
Yeah, another good question. And I would pick that apart in just a couple of ways. So first part, I would say if your mindset is all I need is 12 steps and working with my CSAT, and that is all that my recovery is, no, you're not going to get well doing that because recovery is a whole life, holistic type of pursuit. So it's not just focusing on stopping a behavior, although early on you need almost an exclusive focus on that. Solid recovery comes from an integrated place. So throughout the course of somebody's sex addiction recovery and treatment, yes, you'll have a sponsor, you'll have 12 steps, you'll have a therapist or two or three. Sometimes uh, it might take a minute, or you might do a piece of really significant work with one therapist and need to graduate onto another one. And keeping the consistent thread on, focusing on my sobriety and stability. At some point, you may add your medical doctor to that. You may look at sleep patterns. You may look at hormone balances and imbalances. You may need to pharmacologically treat things like depression or anxiety or ADHD or other health conditions. Because I say that because self-neglect is not a sign of good recovery. So you may add to that, you may have a spiritual or a religious reawakening. So you may add to that a mentor, a pastor, a priest, a rabbi, um, a study group, and that may be recovery supportive stuff. You may add to that friendships, both within and without fellowship. You may add to that an exercise routine. You may add to that a focus on how you keep your house and the area around you. So again, recovery is a whole life thing. And if you are starting off with, this is all I need and this is all I will do, you're not going to go far. Early in my recovery, I remember one day making the determination. I was full of a lot of shame and fear, and I thought coming clean would mean that I lost everything. And my determination was, so be it. If that's what it takes, if I lose my standing in this community, if it shuts down this or that opportunity for me, that's how like isolated and fearful I was. There was not an area of my life that I was not willing to experience radical change in. Now, 20 years on, I'm still discovering what that radical change is, and I'm discovering areas of my life that need that radical change that I hadn't anticipated earlier, but it's part of that ongoing process. And so then the second part of that, learning how to create new habits around integrity. Um, I would look at integrity in both senses. So there's the modern sense, which has to do with honesty. It has to do with congruence. And then there's the traditional sense of integrity, the archaic sense of integrity, which means wholeness, completeness, strength throughout. Um, so again, if you're only looking for, am I textbook honest? It'll get you a lot. It'll get you a lot, but not everything that recovery could offer. And I do think that recovery is one of those endeavors that if you're not going to go for all that it can offer, why are you doing it? Recovery has taught me and so many other people so many valuable lessons in living life well. And there are lessons from early on that I still return to that have nothing to do with being sober. Um, they have to do again with that better life, more attunement, better health, um, firmer happiness, more rock solid contentment.
Yeah.
That's how I'd answer that one.
Yeah. There's actually research out there that shows the more things a person does for their recovery, the more likely they are to not only stay sober, but to recover, to heal. So 12-step meetings, CSAT, great. But with your CSAT, are you doing individual and group? Probably need to. Are you taking an online work group? Are you, you know, doing the men's group at your church? Are you exploring things like that? And also little things. My first sponsor said you make your bed every day, no matter what. You don't go to bed at night if there are dishes in the sink, no matter what. And I'm like, what does this have to do with recovery? And he said, just trust me, you'll feel better. You know, and I was like, oh, it's about more than
Mhm.
stopping the problem behavior. So yeah, I agree with John 100% on everything there. 110%. Um, so, okay, I'm a betrayed partner. I don't understand my husband. He is unable to demonstrate any empathy for me and only me. He only shows true emotions and crying when it is about his mom. He can listen to a song about mom and his tears roll and his breathing changes and he gets very emotional. Can you give me insight into the possible reasons? Thank you.
Could be enmeshment. His loyalty
Could
and his
be.
emotions, his loyalty and his emotions may belong to his mother. And as silly as that can look on the surface, if that's the case, like that's a really profound wound there, where you can't love and give your heart to the person of your choosing because it belongs to your mom. And I have not seen a person in that position who says, it's this way because I want it to be this way. It's this way because my mother made it clear that my heart belonged to her and that I was to love nobody else but her. I had a client who, up until the night before he got married, or the day he got married, every time he left the house, his mom's parting words would be, remember who the most important woman in your life is. Speaking of herself. And the day he got married, she said, I'm no longer the most important woman this person you're marrying is. But the damage was already done. He wasn't free to love or pursue anything that his mother didn't approve of. So I would say it's most likely enmeshment. Um, I would encourage your spouse to read When He's Married to Mom. And if he gets angry or feels sick to his stomach while he's reading it, then he's on the right track. And he should get a hold of me, and we can get him in a workshop and help him start to free up some emotional space, some emotional real estate, which I have to say, as the partner, someone that space will not automatically be yours. If that were to happen, that would actually be a recreation of what mom did. That space has to be his and always be his, that he shares with the person that he wants to share it with in the way that he authentically wants to share it. And that's where our love and our relationships become special. That's where our bonds become special, is when we are in charge of our own heart space, when we're in possession of our own heart space, and we can share it fully with the people we choose. There's I would not say there's a choice going on here. I would say he's never felt free to love anyone as much as he's supposed to love his mom, and that's pretty sad.
Yeah. Do you have workshops upcoming, John, for
Yes.
mother enmeshment?
So the next workshop, I think we have openings in. I think there's still some room in the workshop I'll be running in July. And then we have an August workshop and a September. I think we have a workshop every month through the end of this year scheduled already. So there's plenty of opportunities.
Yeah, and they can go to your website, whitepinerecovery.com, I believe, and
Mhm.
find
Or
info.
or or overcomingenmeshment.com. We'll have that too.
Yeah. My husband frowns upon other men, family and friends, acting out, yet he sees nothing wrong with his acting out. Why is this?
It's
I
called
love
project.
this.
It's called projection. It's a defense mechanism. It means there's denial and distortion. So again,
Uh,
not maturity here.
yeah. If John was doing these behaviors, John would need to go to treatment. But it's okay for me. I'm different, you know. Um, and we have a million things we can fill into that stem sentence. It's denial. Send him to my work group. I'll work with him on denial.
Yeah,
I
Scott
got a sex
Scott
addiction
is
work group starting tomorrow.
Scott is very good at that.
Uh, so, what are some milestones or signs that indicate it's time to move from addiction centered recovery to more of a relational, emotional, and spiritual centered recovery as it relates to therapy? Great question.
Yeah, so I think when you are not white knuckling every day to stay sober, cravings can still exist, but when you find yourself, what is that promise from AA? We intuitively handle that which used to baffle us. So when you're starting to feel intuitive about being able to maintain your sobriety, it might be time, I would say, widen the focus of your recovery. Um, because as solid as you may be, it doesn't take much to completely obliterate that sobriety foundation. So I wouldn't say it's a change. I would say it's a broadening. Maybe it doesn't take as much energy for me. Maybe I have a really solid program. I've created a lot of safety in my environment around me. It's harder for me to, I'd have to work harder to relapse. Then it's time, I think, to put more of a focus on those other aspects of recovery
Agreed.
and
Is
and
going
some
to
and some time. So like I would say a good 6 to 12 months in that space is a place to be really. I have a mentor who used to say to me, the best way to prepare for the next growth curve is to do the plateau you're on really, really
yeah,
well. And then the energy just kind of takes you when you're ready. You don't have to force it.
yeah. When you're stabilized, when you have support around you, you're ready to take the next step because the
Yeah,
next step will destabilize you. So make sure you're stable on your plateau. Yeah.
yeah.
Is going to church on Sundays, reading the Bible, and attending church men's group considered recovery? There's no 12-step work other than listening in on 12-step Zoom calls, but there's no active participation, no working the steps. Also, seeing a trauma therapist not consistently, about 13 sessions in the last 12 months. Is this considered active recovery?
I would say no, because as much as the some 12 steps say that addiction is a spiritual malady, it's also a brain malady. It's also a physical malady. So all of those things, which can be really, really great on their own, that would be like saying I'm curing cancer by doing those things. that is not the most robust way to take care of a malady of this nature. Although it's important, like Scott's point before, like do the churchmen's group,
Mhm.
do reading, like do all of that you can with a bent on recovery. But the core of it is you are actively working steps, not just listening. So it's awesome to watch other people take medicine and get well, but if you're not taking the medicine yourself, you're not really treating anything. Therapy for early recovery needs to be at least once a week.
Mhm.
There's a lot
At
that can
least.
change. There's a lot of denial you can drift into in between sessions. So it's not even a matter of like seeing the right person. It's keeping yourself on that edge of awareness, out of denial, out of distortion, and you need another set of eyes to do that. You can't self-monitor and stay on top of all that you need to.
Yeah. During your presentation, I thought about Taoism's practice of fasting of the heart, checking and deconstructing the biases that you may have and not know about. Also, the phrase, there are three sides to every story came to mind, your side, their side, and the truth. Um, I worry that I may have an inner depth that my husband might never have the capacity or capability to understand. Um, this might result me not being able to feel truly heard, seen, understood, and accepted at the deepest parts of my core self and personal lived experiences. Do you see their, meaning the addict's simplicity, evolve to profundity in cases where they are in good recovery?
This is an interesting question. It reminds me of a little bit of a debate that I was having this weekend with some colleagues. We were talking about enmeshment. I'm going to be giving a presentation next week to ITAP on enmeshment and their partners and their relationships. And we were debating on whether or not the term healed should be used. And my question to my colleague who understandably is going for a healing or a healed mentality here, I said, whose definition of whole and healed is that? Whose definition of well is it? Here I would point to from the humanist perspective, I would point to that individual agency. Um, I don't know, or I would examine the bias that may say to be able to have a deep level of profound insight either makes you a better or more healed human. Where did that come from? Um, I think you have to be careful, and a lot of I see this happen often. We'll put a lot of we'll attach a lot to recovery. This may not be a recovery thing because someone may not desire that nor need it. And other people may desire it and need it profoundly, and that's great. But there's some differentiation there, and I think partners have to be careful about what they are looking for, the terms they make in and of themselves that evaluate the effectiveness of each other's recovery. The effectiveness of my recovery is ultimately between me and my higher power, and my therapist is part of that. Um, and then all things in a relationship after that are terms of negotiation. Maybe this is not as important or necessary to me as it might be to you. And we may have a difference that we either have to figure out how to bridge the gap in our relationship without fundamentally changing each other, or we have to be able to accept with grace and realize that it may be best for us not to pursue a future together. So that would be my reaction.
Or to get that need for profundity met in a different setting. I mean,
Right.
expecting one person to meet all of your emotional and psychological needs is setting yourself up for disappointment. Some people are perfectly happy skimming the surface of life.
Yeah.
Doesn't work for me, but some people are. And maybe if I need something more profound, maybe it's like, you know what, I'm going to go to the spiritual center on Sundays and
Hmm.
you go play golf. You know, have fun with your
Hmm.
buddies. I'm going to go get this need met in a way that you either don't want to meet it or can't.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if it's a really deep core issue for you, yeah, maybe it isn't the right match, but
Yeah.
not necessarily. Anyway, last one we're going to get to today. Can we work on building intimacy before my sex addict husband gets into good recovery? If so, how?
You can. I wouldn't advise it. Here's why. Um, Intimacy is not like eating at a really good restaurant that you could save up your money for and have an amazing experience and then not be able to do again for a while because you're out of money. That I think tends to do more damage, and that's what folks in early recovery or non-solid recovery can offer. Is I could give you some flash in the pan. We could have a really great moment of intimacy here, but it will not be sustained because there's too much underlying dysregulation. So I would say again, you focus on individual stability, recovery, and this is one of those that like when you establish that the focus will widen. You'll feel called into that. You'll feel ready for it versus it's time to start building intimacy.
Yeah, thank you. Um, Thank you, Jon. It's great to be here again. It's great to
So good to
see
see
you. I
you.
missed you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for the great questions. Jon, thank you for the great topic. I will get this posted on our YouTube channel as soon as I'm able. And if you didn't get your question answered today, there were quite a few of them. Bring them in 2 weeks, and Jon will be back.
Okay.
So
Bye,
thanks, everybody.
everybody. See you, Scott.